Lawrence of Arabia is a unique specimen in the genre of war films. Essentially, it's a character study, which follows the rise and fall of T.E. Lawrence, a man who is seduced by what William James called the beauty of war, and consequently loses his identity, becomes claimed by the desert, and defined by its barbaric way of life. In the end, he becomes equal parts hero, monster, and victim. Essentially, this film is a tragedy, not of the vanquished, but of the victorious conqueror, depicting tragedy in victory. The film opens with Lawrence's death and a scene of his funeral, where different people offer differing opinions of who he was as a man.
He was the most extraordinary man I ever knew.
He was a poet, a scholar, and a mighty warrior.
Thank you.
He was also the most shameless exhibitionist since Barnum and Bailey.
Some say he was extraordinary. Others say he was a charlatan. Lawrence is a mystery, and we are left with the question, just who is Lawrence of Arabia? Does he really deserve a memorial bust in St. Paul's Cathedral? That's the question this film sets out to answer. We cut to a scene of Lawrence himself in the basement of the British headquarters in Cairo, where his job is to make maps of locations in the Middle East. This scene introduces Lawrence as being fundamentally an idealist in the broadest sense of the term. He's an intellectual. His job is to make fabricated images of real things. He exists in the world of ideas.
He knows his stuff, sir. Knows the books, you mean?
More significantly, Lawrence is defined by his belief in mind over matter. He extinguishes the flame of a match with only his bare fingers.
You do that once too often. It's only flesh and blood.
Michael George Hartley, you're a philosopher.
Lawrence is a creature of the mind, and his mind can triumph completely over his body. Rather than being a slave to physical pressures, he will not allow himself to be manipulated or controlled by pain or the limitations of the flesh.
It damn well hurts.
Certainly it hurts.
Well, what's the trick then?
The trick, William Potter, is not minding that it hurts.
In fact, he goes out of his way to submit himself to unnecessary pain as an expression of his mental power and freedom. The match itself serves as a preparatory symbol of the desert, as it is used to cut from the safety of Cairo to the burning dunes of the desert, a place which for most men is a living hell.
Take it from me. For ordinary men, it's a burning, fiery furnace.
No, Dryden. It's going to be fun.
But for Lawrence, the desert is a thing to be extinguished between his fingers, or blown out by his pneuma. Indeed, for him, the desert is going to be fun. And at first, it is. Lawrence befriends his Bedouin guide, gifting him his own personal revolver, in a demonstration of immense trust. In return, his guide teaches him how to ride a camel like a true nomad. Everything is going splendidly. But as they are refreshing themselves at a certain well, a mysterious stranger approaches, and Tafis reaches for the gifted pistol and is consequently gunned down. Lawrence's kind gesture has arguably led to the justified killing of his new friend. It turns out that the desert operates on laws and principles that Lawrence isn't fully prepared for. The desert is a fire, stranger and more untamed than the gentle flame of his British match. But still, Lawrence is determined to close his mind around it. The mysterious stranger is Sharif Ali. He takes the pistol from the dead Bedouin and symbolically assumes the role of the guide, offering to take Lawrence where he needs to go. But Lawrence refuses his guidance. What we learn about Lawrence is that, first of all, he does not like killing, especially senseless killing. As is said later in the film, he has a horror of bloodshed.
Major Lawrence has a horror of bloodshed.
That is exactly so. With Major Lawrence, mercy is a passion.
He is against bloodshed, and it is a hill that he is literally willing to die on, rejecting the Sharif's help, refusing to have anything to do with him.
None of my friends is a murderer.
He would rather wander in the desert without a guide, at the risk of his own life, than be in the company of someone he considers a murderer. From this we learn furthermore that Lawrence holds death in contempt, staring down Ali without flinching, firmly believing he can overcome any obstacle, even the desert, with his own mind. He goes on his solitary way, singing a show tune about a gambler who beats the house by, shall we say, making his own luck. Lawrence is in control of chance and fate.
And where are you going, Lieutenant?
And he eventually goes so far as to assume the role of a miracle worker.
To work your miracle.
Presuming the ability to work miracles, daring to attempt the impossible, and make it so. This determination is put on full display later in the film, when Lawrence and Ali are leading a force of Arabs across the Nefud Desert, a relentless slab of unforgiving hell, an unforgiving hell that Ali believes is impossible to cross.
You are mad. To come to Aqaba by land, we should have to cross the Nefud Desert.
That's right.
The Nefud cannot be crossed.
I'll cross it if you will.
But Lawrence convinces him, through sheer willpower, they can conquer the desert, mind over matter.
I can't answer for the place, only for myself.
The miracle is accomplished when they reach the other side of the uncrossable desert.
Then we've done it.
But there's still another miracle left to work, as they discover that during the night, one of the men had drifted off to sleep and fell off his camel. Everyone gives him up for dead. Everyone except Lawrence, who insists on going back to save him. Ali says this is basically a suicide mission.
We cannot go back.
I can.
If you go back, you kill yourself is all. Qasim, you have killed already.
So Lawrence goes back alone, saying that he has determined the future in his head. And indeed, this seems to be the case, for he successfully saves the fallen man and brings him back, doing what seemed impossible, and thus proving that his mind is the ultimate determining factor of his fate. Or so it seems. Unfortunately, as we saw with the fiasco at the well, the way of the desert is not so easy for Lawrence to tame. On the eve of the attack on the port of Aqaba, a scuffle breaks out between two Bedouin tribes because a man from one tribe has killed a man from another tribe. In order to settle the dispute, Lawrence agrees to act as mediator and execute the murderer himself. But it just so happens that the murderer is Qasim, the man that Lawrence risked his life to save from the desert. True to his word, Lawrence kills Qasim, but not very well. Lawrence, who, as we remember, has a horror of bloodshed, is pretty shaken by this. But we don't really know how deeply shaken he is until sometime later, when, back at the British headquarters in Cairo, he admits that he had to kill a man, and there was something about the killing that he didn't like.
There was something about it I didn't like.
Well, naturally.
No, something else.
I see. Well, that's all right. Let it be a warning.
No, something else.
What then?
I enjoyed it.
At this point, Lawrence is a character in crisis, liking what he hates and hating what he likes. His identity is in shambles, a fact which is driven home for us a few scenes earlier when, upon reaching the Suez Canal, a rando motorcyclist calls out,
Who are you? Who are you?
"Yeah, buddy, Lawrence is asking the same question. He doesn't know who he is. His whole adventure in the desert has made him question his entire identity. And so he returns to where he came from, not as he left, but in a completely different garb, unrecognized at first by his former colleagues, having been thrust into a foreign world and a hostile environment, forced to do things he never dreamed of. In my opinion, these scenes make Lawrence of Arabia one of the most psychologically ambitious films ever made. And at this point, we are only halfway through the film. This scene is the peak of a pyramid. We have just witnessed the rise of Lawrence, going from the basement to the top floor, from making maps to changing them, from clumsy lieutenant to conquering prince, from a speck on the horizon to a man who dominates the picture, emerging from the triumph of mind over body. The rest of the film chronicles Lawrence's downfall. As the roles are inverted, the desert comes to triumph over his mind. When we return from intermission, the second half begins not with Lawrence, but with the arrival of Jackson Bentley, a journalist from the United States who has come to make Lawrence into a myth, a symbol of the adventure of war.
I'm looking for a hero. Now, I've been sent to find material which will show our people that this war is...
Enjoyable?
Well, hardly that, sir. But to show it in its more adventurous aspects.
You are looking for a figure who will draw your country towards war.
All right? Yes.
Lawrence is your man.
Yes, sir, that's my baby.
Bentley is an important figure because I believe this latter half of the film is structured around the idea that there are two Lawrences. One is the quote-unquote real physical Lawrence, and the other is the idea or the myth of Lawrence, which is conveniently embodied symbolically for us by Bentley.
Illusions can be very powerful, particularly when they take this form.
Always slinging around his notepad and his camera, Bentley represents the image or persona of Lawrence that is presented to the world. One might say Lawrence's simulacrum.
Start if I take your picture? All right. Okay.
Whenever Bentley is present, Lawrence is triumphant, immortal, and having a darn good time at war. He's a kid in a candy shop, blowing up Turkish trains, and he seems unable to die. A wounded Turk tries in vain to kill him, firing shot after shot, but missing.
Never seen a man killed with a sword before.
Why don't you take a picture?
Wish I had.
The camera, according to some Bedouins, is able to steal one's virtue, an idea which seems to be borne out. As the camera becomes a kind of surrogate mind for Lawrence, he thinks of himself in terms of his own image or his own persona, and he increasingly believes himself to be invincible.
Not hurt at all. Didn't you know? They can only kill me with a golden bullet.
They think he's a kind of prophet. They do, or he does.
The pinnacle of Lawrence's hubris comes when he proposes to enter the Turkish-controlled city of Deraa with only a small handful of Arab soldiers against an entire Turkish garrison, a veritable suicide mission. But Lawrence has done the impossible before. Why not do it again?
No, they must move mountains for you. They must walk on water.
That's right. That's right. Who are you to know what can be done?
Unfortunately, Lawrence is more out of touch with reality now than he was when he conquered the Nefud Desert. His mind, steeped in illusions, at one with the artificial image of the camera, is increasingly estranged from his circumstance and his body. Lawrence demands the impossible.
Who will walk on water with me?
He presumes to walk on water and is nearly run over.
Madness.
He is so out of touch with his own flesh that he goes so far as to think he can pass for an Arab.
I am invisible.
That's how far his mind has become from his body. When he is discovered and tortured, the reality of his body reasserts itself with violent force. The implications of the Turk grabbing his skin are horrifying, and it's a powerful device that tells us what's going on without showing us. But despite the sexual implication, we should remember that most importantly, this is a reminder to us and Lawrence that he is flesh and blood. This is the point that Lawrence's illusion breaks, and he comes to see his flesh, not his mind, as determining his fate. Biological determinism is taking the place of idealism. Mind cannot win over matter. Not this time. He is neither invisible nor invincible. He is nothing but flesh. To keep my mind in control, I numbered the blows, but after 20, lost count, and could feel only the shapeless weight of pain, not tearing claws for which I was prepared, but a gradual cracking apart of all my being by some too great force, whose waves rolled up my spine till they were pent within my brain, and there clashed terribly together. At last, when I was completely broken, they seemed satisfied. I had strung myself to learn all pain until I died, and, no longer an actor, but a spectator, cared not how much my body jerked and squealed in its sufferings. I was feeling very ill, as though some part of me had gone dead that night in Dera, leaving me maimed, imperfect, only half myself. It could not have been the defilement, for no one ever held the body in less honor than I did myself. Probably, it had been the breaking of the spirit by that frenzied, nerve-shattering pain, which had degraded me to beast level, when it made me grovel to it, and which had journeyed with me since, a fascination and terror and morbid desire, lascivious and vicious, perhaps, but like the striving of a moth toward its flame.
I've come to the end of myself, I suppose.
And the end of the Arab Revolt?
I'm not the Arab Revolt, Ali. I'm not even an Arab.
A man can be whatever he wants. You said.
I'm sorry. I thought it was true.
You proved it.
Look, Ali. Look. That's me. What color is it?
Your skin is very fair.
That's me. And there's nothing I can do about it.
A man can do whatever he wants. You said.
He can. But he can't want what he wants. This is the stuff that decides what he wants.
So he gives up on the Arab Revolt, and he returns to the British headquarters. This time, back in British uniform. A uniform he has had to borrow, so he's still not back to where he was in the beginning. He has had to borrow back an identity, like the one he previously had, but one which is not entirely his own.
You've read my stuff. I've made that boy a hero. When the war's over, that boy can be anything he wants.
Yes. Well, at the moment, he wants to be somebody else.
In Cairo, he learns about the plans to divide up the Middle East after the war between the French and English. Aptly, in a room that is framed on all sides by the busts of what I assume are Roman conquerors. And it's here that the conqueror Lawrence begins to bleed from the wounds he sustained while being beaten. There is a price for imperial hubris. While he had wanted to give up the desert, the Sykes-Picot Agreement causes Lawrence to go back. He is determined to thwart the Europeans and give the Arabs back their home. We see him step in front of a mosaic of what seems to be a falling god. While a comparison to Icarus would be apt, since Lawrence too has fallen because he flew too high, this seems to be a god of war, cast from a shattered chariot. This too is what Lawrence is. This symbolic moment marks a decisive change in the tone of the film. When Lawrence returns to the desert, he is different.
You've not Major Lawrence since he's come back, Sharif?
Yes.
Changed, hasn't he?
No.
Oh, I'd say he had. Different man, I'd say.
Despite once again donning his Bedouin robes, he is not the man he was.
What is this?
This is my bodyguard.
There's not a man there without a price on his head.
There's a price on my head, too.
But these are murderers. You know the sheikhs will hang these men.
These men are mine. None of my friends is a murderer.
Was it the Turks that changed him? Or was it the English? Perhaps both. The Turks had broken his body, and the British imperialists opened the wounds again in another symbolic torture.
Personal, are you mad?
No. And if you don't mind, I'd rather not go mad.
For the rest of the film, Lawrence seems strangely absent, like a distant god. He holds his head high in elevated pomp. The soul that once animated this body seems to be gone. He seems hollow and indifferent. When Jerusalem is shelled by the British, he seems calloused and numb.
God help the men who lie under that.
They're Turks.
God help them.
He is at his most fleshly. He's bought half of his soldiers with British money, including a bodyguard, to protect his flesh, for no longer is he immortal. When coming upon a fleeing Turkish army, which has just done some very bad things to an Arab village, he is faced with the choice of going to Damascus to give the Arabs their freedom,
No prisoners.
or attacking the Turks.
Orans, not this. Go round. Damascus, Orans. Damascus.
No prisoners.
It is the proverbial choice between heaven and hell, between the best ideals of the Arab Revolt and the basest indulgence in bloodlust. Lawrence chooses blood.
No prisoners! No prisoners!
The pleasure of killing that germinated in Aqaba is now bearing its fruit in full bloom. Mercy is no longer one of his virtues. Bloodshed is no longer a horror. All scruples are removed, and he gives in to the desert, to the pure animal joy of killing. He has become barbarous and cruel. By my orders, we took no prisoners, for the only time in the war. There lay on us a madness, born of the horror of Tafas, or of its story, so that we killed and killed, even blowing in the heads of the fallen and of the animals, as though their death and running blood could slake the agony in our brains. This was one of the nights in which mankind went crazy, when death seemed impossible, however many died to the right and left, and when others' lives seemed just toys to break and throw away. In the aftermath of the slaughter, Ali finds Lawrence leaning wearily against a wagon and looking at his own reflection in his knife, as he did before. But this time the man in the reflection is different. And it's at this point when Bentley stumbles on the scene in horror and takes his final photograph that the two polarized Lawrences are at complete odds. The idealized simulacrum, the fictionalized hero, holding the barbarous reality in contempt. And with this final photograph, the ideal Lawrence is gone forever. If he exists only outside Lawrence, in the newspapers and in his reputation, but not in himself. The Lawrence that is left is feeble. He can no longer work miracles. He is impotent. Though he arrives in Damascus before the British, he cannot make the Bedouin tribes cooperate or learn how to operate a modern city with modern machinery. He is forced to watch everything he has fought and suffered for fall apart as the British sweep in and take control.
I pray that I may never see the desert again. Hear me, God.
Lawrence prays never to see the desert again, resolving the plot that began in the beginning with his desire for the desert,
It's going to be fun.
his consummation with the desert,
My God, I love this country.
and now his disillusionment. Auda responds by saying,
You will come. There is only the desert for you.
Lawrence is no longer a free agent. He is a determined creature, completely of the desert. Like Jack Torrance in Kubrick's adaptation of The Shining, Lawrence is absorbed into Arabia. He no longer originates from England, nor does he belong to England. He has been remade, broken down, and shaped into the image of the desert. He originates from the desert and belongs to it. He is Lawrence of Arabia. Of course, we know from the beginning of the film that Lawrence does go back to England, but this is merely another shade of his duality, being rejected by both the Arabs and the British. He seems unable to recognize the word home.
Well, sir, going home. Home, sir.
He is a Bedouin nomad, sent to wander on western shores, being passed in a cloud by a motorcyclist, who reminds us once again of the fate that awaits him. The essence of the desert was the lonely individual, the son of the road, moving always, as much apart from the world as in a grave. These troopers went about in flocks like slow sheep, and looked not worthy of the privilege of space. Lawrence of Arabia is probably in my top 5 favorite films of all time. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to do an exhaustive analysis of this film, but even if I can't talk about the whole movie in a single video, we can still talk about the film in the comments. If you have any thoughts on points that I may have missed, then let us all know in the comments. And that being said, I want to take this opportunity to thank those of you who have been sharing my videos. A ton of new subscribers to this channel have come from places like Facebook or Reddit, and I'm not really active on either of those platforms. So that means the growth this channel has been experiencing is all thanks to you guys, and that means the world to me. I really, really appreciate it. If you are active on Facebook and you want to connect with my stuff on there, I have just thrown up a Facebook page, and you can check that out if you feel so inclined. I also throw stuff up on Instagram on occasion, so if you're interested in any of that stuff, I'll link to it in the description.